From highway classics that rattled your teeth, to military monsters that gave away their position, all the way up to machines whose roar could shatter concrete or trigger seizures, every engine on this list was banned not because of failure, but because their noise crossed a line society refused to tolerate. Some were undone by city ordinances, others by federal edict, or even international treaty. Which mechanical scream was too much for America to handle? Let us find out, starting at number 10. The Detroit Diesel 12V71 wasn't just an engine, it was a siren song for anyone who grew up on the highway. 12 cylinders, 2-stroke cycle, and a roots blower shoving air in by force. In a world of 4-stroke engines, where you get one power pulse every other crank revolution, the Detroit doubled down, with one power stroke every single revolution per cylinder. That meant twice the exhaust pulse frequency, twice the bark, and a sound that cut through steel cabs, truck stops, and your skull. That shriek hit around 95 to 105 decibels at the roadside, enough to drown out your CB and rattle the diner windows. Mechanics called it the green leaker, not just for the color, but for the oil haze and the puddles it left behind. By the 1980s, the EPA started cracking down on nitrogen oxides and particulate emissions. The old 2-stroke design could not keep up with the new rules, and Detroit phased out the 71 series in favor of the quieter, cleaner 4-stroke Series 60. Sure, the new engines ran smoother and passed the sniff test, but you will never mistake a Series 60 for a screaming Jimmy coming over the rise. Next up, the Jacobs engine brake, better known as the Jake brake. If you have ever heard a semi coming down a steep grade, you know the sound. A rapid-fire, metallic brrr peep that hits like a jackhammer at 100 to 110 decibels. Here is why it is so violent. When the Jake brake is switched on, it turns the diesel into a giant air compressor. The system pops the exhaust valve open right at top dead center, dumping all that compressed air straight into the stack before it can push the piston back down. Instead of a steady drone, you get a series of explosive pressure pulses, each one a miniature cannon blast out the exhaust. Pause now for 5 seconds to let the Jake brake audio play. That sound is so sharp, towns started posting no engine braking signs at their city limits. Local ordinances banned the Jake not because it was unsafe, but because the noise kept neighbors up at night. The irony is loud. Engine brakes are a lifesaver on long descents. Ban them, and you are betting everything on friction brakes that can fade or fail. For city councils, peace and quiet always wins over a trucker's peace of mind. Harley's big twin V-twin with straight pipes is the sound of rebellion you can feel in your chest. No water jackets, no baffles, just raw exhaust pounding out low-frequency thunder. Stand next to a Screamin' Eagle at idle, and you are looking at 105 decibels. Easy, sometimes more if the pipes are wide open. That is not just loud, that is full body vibration. 5-second audio drop, straight pipe rumble. The whole idea behind Screamin' Eagle was to let riders dump the factory mufflers and tune the fuel map for more power and more noise. The result was bikes that blew past both emissions and noise limits, all while wearing a Harley badge. For a while, you could walk into a dealer and buy a kit that turned your street bike into a rolling open header. The EPA finally noticed. By the late 2000s, Harley was forced to pull the most aggressive tuners and exhausts from the shelves, pay millions in civil penalties, and split their catalog between race-only and 49 state legal parts. Officially, it was about emissions tampering. Unofficially, it was the government putting a price tag on attitude. And yet, if you ever rode behind one of those old Screamin' Eagles, you know quiet just is not the same thing as safe. Union Pacific's GTEL. Big Blow didn't just run trains, it unleashed 8,500 horsepower of jet roar straight down the rails. This was not a diesel with a rhythm or a chuff. This was pure, unbroken turbine noise, the kind that could be heard for miles before you ever saw the headlight. The Big Blow burned Bunker C, the thickest, cheapest sludge you could pour into a tank, and spat out exhaust so hot and loud that rail fans still argue whether it actually softened bridge asphalt. Audio drop. 5 seconds of full-throttle turbine roar. At trackside, the sound meter would spike to 120 decibels, louder than a rock concert, deep enough to shake the fillings out of your teeth. In cities like Los Angeles, the complaints started stacking up fast. Neighbors called the railroad, the city council called Union Pacific, and soon enough, the big blows were banned from idling near residential yards. By the early 1970s, fuel prices and political pressure finished what the noise started. The last GTEL locomotives were retired, too loud and too expensive for the suburbs and for the accountants. You want to talk about noise complaints? Try explaining to a city council why their windows rattle every time the 815 freight rolls through. The Ford GAAV8 was never designed for subtlety. Drop a 1,100 cubic inch, all-aluminum V8 into a steel box, bolt on short exhaust stacks, and you get a battlefield signature you cannot mistake. At full throttle, the M4A3. Sherman tanks GAA hammered out 450 to 500 horsepower with a deep, unmuffled roar that carried far beyond the tree line. Crews talked about the way the engine's high revs and straight pipes turned every advance into a rolling announcement. German infantry could often identify Shermans by sound alone. No need for binoculars when you could hear the V8 echoing across the fields. Now, 5 seconds of GAA startup and hard acceleration audio. On paper, the GAA gave the Sherman the muscle to keep up with the war's demands. But in practice, that gasoline howl gave away your position before you ever crested a ridge. After the war, the US Army shifted to diesel tanks, not because of a memo about noise, but for better fuel safety and range. Still, every diesel that followed was a little harder to pick out by ear, a quiet nod to the fact that in combat, the loudest machine is usually the first one spotted. If you wanted stealth, you did not want a Ford GAA. You wanted something your enemy could not hear coming. During the Cold War, the loudest warning ever built in America ran on pure horsepower. Chrysler's air raid siren did not just announce trouble, it threatened to take your hearing with it. Under the hood, a 180 horsepower Hemi 5. 8 engines spun a rotor the size of a trash can lid, forcing air through a starter to unleash a civil defense howl at 137 to 138 decibels. That is not just a loud sound, that is instant hearing damage for anyone nearby, and it could be audible for dozens of miles under the right conditions. Listen to 5 seconds of the Chrysler Hemi siren. Every city wanted one on the roof of their firehouse, ready for the Soviets or a tornado. But the price of that kind of warning was steep. One full power blast could shatter windows, set off car alarms, and leave anyone too close with ringing ears for days. After the Cold War, most of these monsters were decommissioned or locked away. A handful survive in private hands, but even collectors know better than to run them in town. Fire it up, and you are likely to get a visit from the local sheriff and a stack of noise complaints. The siren was not banned by a memo or a treaty. It was silenced by the simple fact that nobody could stand to be near it. The Pratt & Whitney J57 didn't just power the jet age, it forced America to rewrite the rulebook on noise. This was the engine behind the first Boeing 707 and DC-8, a pure turbojet with no fan up front, just a straight shot of exhaust at nearly Mach 1. On takeoff, airports would hit 140 to 150 decibels at the fence, enough to crack windows, rattle walls, and send community complaint lines into meltdown. Water injection was supposed to cool things off and boost thrust, but it only made the roar louder and the smoke thicker. The sound wasn't just volume, it was a tearing metallic shear, jet mixing noise, the kind that drills through concrete and nerves alike. Now 5 seconds of J57 turbojet takeoff, full throttle. People living near LaGuardia and LAX started tracking every departure like a natural disaster. Early community noise surveys from the 1960s are full of stories about plaster falling off ceilings and babies waking up in terror. The FAA responded with FAR, Part 36, Stage 2 Noise Standards. By the 1990s, if you wanted to fly a J-57-powered jet out of a major US airport, you had to bolt on a hush kit the size of a small car or retire the plane entirely. Airlines grumbled about the weight, the cost, and the lost range, but the law was clear: no hush kit, no takeoff. That is how the first nationwide aviation noise ban landed, by making the original jetliner sound illegal. And if you think that was loud, just wait for what came next. Number 3 on the list isn't just loud, it's a physics experiment that never should have left the drawing board. The Republic XF-84H, nicknamed Thunder Screech, was supposed to marry jet speed with propeller efficiency. What it actually produced was a wall of sound that no one wanted to stand near. Under the skin, it ran an Allison XT-40 turboprop, spinning a pair of massive contra-rotating propellers. Here is where things get ugly. At ground idle, the tips of those blades were already pushing Mach 1.1, faster than the speed of sound. That meant every rotation shed a shockwave, not just a whoosh. Instead of a single sonic boom, you got hundreds of micro booms per second radiating out in every direction. Pause for 5 seconds to let the archival audio play. Crew working the flight line reported headaches, nausea, and a sense of disorientation. A few even claimed the noise brought on seizures. Official records do not list medical incidents, but the stories kept piling up. The sound field was so intense, ground personnel had to be moved farther and farther away just to run the engine. At close range, estimates put the XF-84H at 150 decibels or more, well past the threshold for instant hearing damage. The Air Force only built 2. Both spent more time in test bays than in the air. Mechanical problems and minimal performance gains sealed the deal, but everyone agreed on one thing. The Thunder Screech was too brutal for flight lines, hangars, or human ears. When the program was cancelled in 1956, nobody mourned the loss. Even in the age of the jet, this was the only prop plane that could clear out an airbase just by starting up. That is how you know you have built something truly antisocial. Number 2 on the list is not just loud, it is the reason NASA had to invent the world's most expensive fire hose. The Rocketdyne F1, centerpiece of the Saturn V first stage engine, was the biggest single-chamber liquid-fueled engine ever built. Each one cranked out 1.5 million pounds of thrust, and 5 of them fired together at liftoff. When the countdown hit 0, the sound did not just fill the air, it battered the launch pad with over 200 decibels right in the engine plume. At those levels, sound waves become shock waves. Early static tests at Marshall Space Flight Center shredded concrete, sent chunks flying, and scorched the landscape for hundreds of feet. Grass caught fire a mile away. NASA's engineers went to war with the laws of physics. They built a water deluge system that could dump thousands of gallons per second into the flame trench, turning the pad into a man-made monsoon. The idea was not to put out a fire, it was to muffle the sound, break up the shockwaves, and keep the pad from self-destructing. Even with all that water, every launch still battered the concrete, spoiled the surface, and left scars that had to be patched before the next flight. There is a reason the Saturn V could not launch from anywhere near a city. At full throttle, the F1's noise field was so brutal you would risk structural damage to buildings and permanent hearing loss miles from the pad. No other engine ever built has come close to that measured sound pressure. The only way to go louder is to leave the world of chemical rockets behind and start lighting off nuclear bombs. And that is exactly where the story goes next. Project Orion was the loudest engine never built because it was never allowed. In the late 1950s, a team of physicists and engineers led by Stanislaw Ulam and later Freeman Dyson drew up blueprints for a spacecraft that would ride to the stars on the shockwaves of nuclear bombs. The core idea was brutal in its simplicity. Mount a giant steel pusher plate at the back of the ship, stack hundreds of small atomic charges underneath, and set them off in rapid sequence. Each detonation would slam the plate, and a bank of shock absorbers would turn the nuclear blast into forward motion. The result was thrust measured in millions of pounds, and a noise field that did not just break the decibel scale, it rewrote the definition of loud. 5-second audio drop. Orion's shockwaves were not sound in the ordinary sense. Each pulse would have generated a blast over pressure far beyond 200 decibels, crossing the line where air stops transmitting sound and starts transmitting pure force. At that threshold, the pressure wave was not just deafening, it was a physical hazard, flattening structures and rupturing eardrums miles away. The plan called for launches from remote deserts or from the open ocean because no city could survive repeated atmospheric detonations. The pusher plate itself was designed to withstand the fury of 1,000 atomic blasts, with layers of steel and plastic to absorb the violence. Dyson later described the concept as technically feasible, but politically and environmentally toxic. In 1963, the world drew a hard line. The United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, banning nuclear weapon test explosions in the atmosphere, in outer space, or underwater. That single decision killed Orion overnight. No more nuclear detonations in the sky, no more dreams of atomic-powered liftoff. It became the only engine in history banned by international law before it was ever built. Freeman Dyson later reflected that the Test Ban Treaty was the end of all hope for Orion. We could have gone to Mars, even to the moons of Saturn, but the fallout risk was too great for anyone to accept. The ban was not about noise complaints or suburban peace, it was about fallout, arms control, and the raw terror of atomic fire in the open air. If you want to talk about the loudest machine America ever imagined, Orion stands alone. Not just beyond the decibel meter, but beyond what the human body, or the planet, could ever survive. That is how you end a war on noise, with a treaty, a signature, and the quiet that follows a dream too loud to live. Across all 10 engines, one pattern roars above the rest. American innovation pushes limits until society pulls back. These machines were not banned for lack of brilliance. They were silenced when their power crossed into danger. The line between progress and prohibition is drawn by what our bodies, laws, and nerves can endure. Loud engines prove this. True power always tests what civilization can tolerate. What is the loudest machine you have ever heard? Drop it in the comments.